Hello everyone, this is David, and today's movie that we watched is the 1998 movie Phantoms. Now, I rather liked this movie, but almost no one else did, for a couple reasons that I'll go into in a little bit, but I kind of understand where they're coming from. It's a little weird, like kind of not quite as good as Mouth of Madness, but I think if you gave this film to John Carpenter, it would have been amazing, but the director he didn't cut it with how you could have taken it. And there's a lot of elements very similar to The Thing and a few other movies that are quite good, but at the same time, there's some issues. Not enough is done with the premise, in my opinion, and I think they were really limited by a special effects budget. Which is unfortunate, because this movie, if it had the right people doing the FX, if they had the right people, it would have been amazing. And I just think the CGI wasn't there yet. And if this was made now, this would be a really gritty, horrifying movie, but it was made back in the late 90s. So you pretty much know exactly what's going to happen and how this is going to pan out. Nowadays, it would be uncertain, because we have a lot more bad endings in the movie theaters. But back in the 90s, no matter how ridiculous or insane the odds were stacked up against the heroes always came out. It's kind of like in, if anything, it's kind of like, 50s protagonist guy from way back, like Giant Behemoth and whatever. No matter how bad it is, the good guys are going to win. And personally, I'm not the biggest fan of that. I don't believe that victory should be handed to you. I believe that it excuse me, it is something that needs to be earned. And if there is not basically loss, then the victory didn't cost you anything. It didn't take anything. Well, that's not entirely true in movies, but what I'm saying is, if it wasn't a hard fought fight, then it isn't really all that worth it. And honestly, a lot of 90s movies kind of cheapen out their victories by being like, the heroes didn't die, or they didn't have to sacrifice themselves, or this guy you thought was dead is really alive, or, that same sort of thing. Like, everyone's good at, like, everyone survived, yay, no one's dead, and nowadays that never happens. Which is refreshing. Like, nowadays we have much more gritty, down to earth. Well, not really down to earth, because we got some pretty out there movies, but a lot more movies are either have Pyrrhic victories or outright bad endings. Which I remember back when I was a kid thinking, like, oh, the good guys always win. This is kind of overdone. Like, I see this in everything. The good guys always win. And actually, the first case I remember of being a kid, when not like seeing the bad guys win, was back in the mid '90s. It was one of the Roger Corman films. I think it was not of This Earth, of unknown origin. No, Origin Unknown, I think was what's called. I know a lot of movies all sound the same, which basically deals with this parasite that this mining crew finds in the bottom of the ocean. It's not a very good movie by any means, and I thought it was pretty interesting at the time, but I was like, I think 13 or 14. Again, my opinions were very skewed back then. This was Parasite, very reminiscent of The Thing, I guess, and at the end of the movie, it ended up winning, so... And sorry to spoil that movie, but again, not very good. Maybe at some point I'll go into it, but probably not. If so, it'd be a long ways down the road. But yeah, so this one plays it by the numbers, and if it didn't do that, if it was more ambiguous, well, it does kind of end with an ambiguous ending, I'll give you that. But anyway, I've kind of rambled on for 5 minutes now, or 4 minutes, about the movies in the 90s and their flaws, but also their benefit. Like, the thing I loved about 90s movies is that same thing. As funny as I just complained about it, it's kind of just nice. Like, it always ends on a good feeling, so you never feel really bad about yourself after, like, you're never down in the dumps after watching, like, you didn't just watch The Mist and that ending just hits you like a ton of bricks. And if you haven't seen The Mist, go see The Mist. I saw it in the theaters, and it was amazing. And the ending is even more amazing than the rest of the movie. It's the worst ending ever. I loved it. Granted, it's one of those things I take in small doses, because you can't have that all the time. You'll go crazy. Anyway, so let's start to talk about this movie, because we're going on a little bit of a tangent here. So, what is Phantoms about? Like, what does Phantoms mean? And that's kind of what intrigued me. Like, at first I was like, is it a ghost? No, it's not a ghost. So, what is it? Well, this is what happens if you took the black oil from the X-Files and gave it the powers of John Carpenter's The Thing. It's basically a petroleum-based life form that's capable of shapeshifting into anything it is either consumed, or anything it has consumed has thought of. Now just think about the possibilities with that for a second. It can turn into anything it is ever consumed, and allegedly this thing is millions of years old. Allegedly. We don't really find out too many facts about it. And anything it ever dreams of. Like anyone that it's consumed has ever dreamed up. And apparently it consumed some pretty crazy people back in the day. Or during the movie, because they find some pretty messed up stuff. That being said, the monster never really turns into anything all that nightmarish, which is unfortunate. I mean, it does form into a giant mass at one point, but at the end of the day, it doesn't do enough nightmare fuel, in my opinion. Like, this could have been a update to The Thing. That wasn't a remake, it was something wholly new. This could have been an update to The Thing. Paranoid, who's the thing, who's not, all that kind of good stuff. And it just doesn't have the paranoia. It doesn't have the isolation. Well, it kind of has isolation, but at the same time, like, the monster has an agenda. The monster never really is given a name. I guess we'll just call it the Phantoms and the Mother Mass are how we'll differentiate it, I guess, in this. The Phantoms themselves are basically like parts of the Mother Mass. So what happens is, if you think of it kind of like a colony of insects, the whole colony is one organism. And each insect is a phantom. It's a part of that thing, but not separate. Even though it is separate. All connected. Dubiously. So an ant hive is a decent analogy. There's one central part, and then all of the kind of little fingers that break off and go off and do whatever it needs to do. Hunt, scout, do whatever. And these phantoms can take any shape or form of anything it is consumed. Which is interesting, but it only ever takes the shape of a few things. It takes the shape of a dog, takes the shape of a leopard gecko, takes the shape of people. The one cool moment is when it takes the shape of a giant moth that eats guy's face off, which I thought was pretty interesting. But it never really goes anywhere with that. I haven't read the book. This is based on a Dean Koontz novel, so I don't know if it did any more stuff in the book. It does have some John Carpenter moments, though, like when the dog's in the church and the investigation team comes in and like tentacles shoot out into all of the masks and fill them with like black sludge, and then the bodies get up and start walking around again. That's kind of creepy, but I think it'd be far creepier if you didn't know who was infected, like completely obviously. But the monster in this is not particularly subtle. Subtlety is not its thing. Also, the monster has gained the idea that it is the devil. Again, consuming the idea from the people it is eaten. It thinks it's the devil because the people that it killed basically thought it was the devil. And the whole premise is it wants the world to know it's the devil and it exists and it's coming for them, kind of like that kind of thing. So let's get into this movie, because we talked about the monster for a while. We've rambled on about the movie, the time period that the movie was filmed in. So let's talk about this movie. So there's these two characters, Jenny and Lisa, who are coming to a resort town where Jenny works in Colorado. And this is a resort up in the mountains. It's really isolated. It has like a very small population in the summer. It has a fairly thriving ski population in the winter, 'cause, again, ski resort town. But right now it's summertime, and the sister's coming up here for like basically a vacation, if you will. She doesn't really want to, but her sister's dragging her along. It's kind of weird. And they come back and they find the place empty, like the town's gone, like just deserted. And the funny thing about that is, I've actually been to resort towns in the off season, specifically in Salisbury, Massachusetts, in mid to late September, and that place is a ghost town. It's kind of disturbing, honestly. It's like something out of Silent Hill. It's really weird. There's like no one around. I think we were there for like 3 days, and we saw like one guy. It was really weird. But so that's the thing. So no one's in this town. It's abandoned. They find a dead body with like black veins, and they're like, "Oh no!" No signs of violence, no signs of a struggle. So they think like like either a chemical problem has happened or biological, like a disease, has happened, because everyone was fine earlier than in the day. So they're looking around and they bump into. First, they think it's a serial killer. Then they think it might be some sort of contagion. Then they bump into the sheriff, who's played by Ben Affleck. You don't bomb in Phantom, or you the bomb in Phantoms, yo, as the affectation goes by Jay. And his partners, which are Wargle and Channing, and they're investigating things. They're looking around. They go to this hotel because the light's on in the hotel, and they find some weird stuff. They find like in some of the rooms just piles of things, and like knickknacks, trinkets, watches, fillings, pacemakers, and they're like, "What is all this stuff? I don't get it." And literally, it's where the monster's been dumping things it can't digest, but we don't know that yet. They find scrawled in a locked room with no windows, so there's no way for the person in there to get out. What's his name? Yeah, Timothy Flight. That's what it is. The ancient enemy, Timothy Flight. So they thought that Timothy Flight might be this guy. So at this point, one of the guys gets killed by I think he gets killed off camera. I don't honestly remember. It's been a couple days since I watched this. He isn't. It's the less important deputy, Channing. He gets killed. He hears noises outside. He gets picked off by something. Wargle, who's been having issues, you kind of get the impression that he's a rapist. They never really go into it, but just the way he looks at the women, and like he does have thoughts, you're pretty sure he's a fucking rapist. And that's an interesting thing to do, I guess. Have your immoral police officer rapist guy. Don't know what's up with that. And he always looks like he's having like this. He has this look on his face, like when he's around the woman, like barely in control, like bloodlust. It's kind of crazy. Like, I don't understand how this guy has lasted as a police officer for any length of time. So that's a thing. Anyway, so at that point, Wargle gets killed by a moth. So we're just left with the girls and Affleck, and they bring his body. They bring the body of the two deputies that were killed, into the hotel that they're in, like the kitchen, basically. They put them on slabs, and later the bodies disappear. So that's this is weird. They managed to call out, though. They get a call out to the FBI to look for Timothy Flight. They call in the CDC because they don't know what the fuck's going on. It's just really weird shit happening all around them. Like at one point, all the lights in the town turn on at the same time, and all of the car alarms go off. And they're like, they're really messed up. So the FBI finds Timothy Flight. The CDC comes in. They bring him in with this crazy, huge, like basically a tank. It's not actually a tank. It's more like an armored contamination thing like an anti like biological weapon research facility that's mobile, which is pretty cool. Don't know if they actually have those, but it was pretty interesting to look at. And the team that comes in, they all get killed off by the Mother Mass. Timothy Flight's investigating it. The main, I don't want to say general guy, but like the leader of the expedition. There's an expedition outside of town that's like quarantining the town. And then there's a expedition that goes into the town. Everyone that goes into the town, other than Flight and the two girls and Affleck, get killed off. Don't know why it kept the girls and Affleck alive, because it only really wanted Flight there. So once Flight's there, they have no purpose. But again, 90s movie, so they don't get killed off. So it kills off everyone and tells Flight to write the gospel, basically thinking it's the devil, and he's his apostle, because he already foretold the coming of the ancient enemy in all these mysterious disappearances, suggesting that this thing has been around for a long time, and any mass extinctions or mysterious vanishings that have happened are its fault. No idea if that's true or not. We don't get any confirmation one way or the other. The thing never tells us, and even if it did, it's like, it could have been it could be lying, you know? Who knows? So anyway, they do some research. They find out it's a petroleum-based creature. It's basically like living oil. And they make an oil-eating bacteria. And at this point, the Phantoms have kind of formed a reverse quarantine. Like, they make their own patrol line outside, which is very kind of strange to watch. And Flight basically asks to see, like, the Mother Mass. And tells them exactly what they're going to do. Tells the thing what it's going to do, because Satan has the biggest ego, and it thinks it's invincible. It doesn't think anyone can hurt it. So they create a anti-oil... They basically have an oil-eating bacteria, and they fire it into the thing and destroys most of it. Meanwhile, Wargle is now chasing the girls around as a phantom. They like blow him in half, so like his lower half becomes tentacles, and he's going all over the place, going nuts. It's pretty funny to watch, actually. As the rapist tentacle monster is chasing after the two girls. That's a nice touch. They end up taking him out though with the anti-oil bacteria. And Affleck faces his own personal demons in the form of a child he killed when he was working for the FBI. And it takes the form of that child. Not exactly sure how it knew that. I mean, maybe one of his deputies knew it, and that's how. Or maybe, I mean, it was the sheriff for the area, so maybe someone else that was, maybe someone who it consumed knew about that. I don't know. It's never really established. But anyway, it turns into the boy. And he's like, and the Mother Mass is like, what are you going to do? Shoot a child? And he's like, no, actually, this time I'm going to miss. Because it's holding the anti-oil bacteria in its hand for some reason. I don't know why it would do that. Shoots it, spreads onto the thing and allegedly consumes it. Which is a nice solution, but the problem with that is you're not dealing, and this is always the problem whenever they deal with some sort of alternate life form. Excuse me. It has no immune system. I mean, oil-eating bacteria exist in nature. They're not uncommon. Or they're uncommon, but, I mean, they exist where oil obviously exists. They've evolved, like, they occur naturally. Generally, they don't live in large numbers, but, I mean, they do exist. Oil and petroleum byproducts are just a natural byproduct of existence, pretty much. So my question is, how does it not have an immune system? And how does it act so quickly? Like, the thing is absolutely massive, and the amounts they fire into it are relatively small. Grenade kind of sized, you know, not particularly huge. I mean, yeah, there's a lot that's being injected, but again, it wouldn't kill you instantly. Kind of like if, you know, I injected you with a ton of X virus, right? Like, or a good example nowadays is like, if you injected somebody with like a ton of Ebola, right? It's not going to kill them instantly. I mean, it will eventually kill them. Well, in theory, but it's not going to kill them like that, like in a second. It's not even going to kill them in 5 minutes. It might take, I mean, generously, it might take a day, depending on the virus. But no, it just is instantly defeated. And I thought that was like very 90s ending. It's all wrapped up nice and neat at the end. But wait. So everyone goes off, everyone's happy. Flight writes his book telling everybody about the ancient enemy. But wait. The final scene is in a bar, and Wargle's there, and he's like, hey, you guys want to see a trick? And that's where it ends. And you're like, okay, so the thing survived, or there's more than one of them, or who knows what happened. Maybe once it was under attack, it split itself off. I mean, it clearly has the ability to do that. So, very interesting movie. Overlooked and underrated, I would say. I can understand, though, why a lot of people didn't like it. It was, it reminds me a lot of The Thing, but not quite as good. So, a lot of issues with that. But still, it's an enjoyable film. It's at the very least, it's inoffensive. As far as, I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with this movie. And if you don't like it, you don't like it, but it's not a terrible movie. It's got problems, certainly, but and it's nothing I haven't seen before. But definitely enjoyable. I suggest checking it out. I'll give this one a solid 3 out of 5. I like it. I've watched it a couple times over the years. I mean, it's not one of my go-to films that I watch all the time, or have watched like a million times, but it's a fine movie. Especially, it's an acceptable B-grade movie. My guess is if this came out today, it would do much better if it had the right director. You need to do that. I don't know if you could do that, but there you go. I doubt this will ever get remade or anything like that. It didn't do well. It's based on a novel by Dean Koontz, who's not a super obscure author, but there are certainly more famous horror writers out there, and other things that need adaptations, I think, sooner. A lot of Stephen King stuff could really benefit from a good director and good adaptation. Like a good adaptation of it would be quite interesting. Like, I'd like to actually see it done well in a theatrical release, or The Stand. I mean, I love the 90s Stand series, but if you did that as like a movie trilogy, I don't know if you could, but if you did, like, that could be interesting. I don't know if the fan base is there anymore, but it's a thing. Stuff like that. Like, I'd like to see The Dark Tower come to theaters. That'd be amazing. Like, that'd be an interesting series. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, and that's just touching with Stephen King, some of his big ones. There's a lot of other famous authors. There's a lot of Lovecraft stories I'd like to see adapted. He's basically the grandfather of modern horror. I'd like to see a lot of his stuff adapted. Like, that the key to that is adapted. The problem with a lot of Lovecraft stuff is it was written in, the early 20th century. A lot of it is not racially sensitive because you could get away with that stuff back then. Racism was just accepted. And honestly, some of his stuff is kind of boring. The problem is you need to have someone that can faithfully adapt it, make it interesting, but at the same time keep the tone. So, I mean, it's very difficult. I'm not saying this is an easy process by any means. Obviously, all of the failed Lovecraft projects show that it is very difficult to make an authentic Lovecraftian film. Best people at doing that: Guillermo del Toro, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and John Carpenter. The best Lovecraft movie I've ever seen, In the Mouth of Madness, and someday I will go over that one. But for now, 3 out of 5 for Phantoms. I've been rambling on for way too long, longer than I probably even reviewed the movie for, about other things and tangential things. But there you go, 3 out of 5. It's a solid B-grade film. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. I led you astray. But I personally enjoy this one. Check it out. Worst case scenario, you wasted about 90 minutes. And again, it's something. It's not the most obscure film, but I think if you like the other films that I've done, give this one a try. At the very least, if you haven't already seen it, you might be surprised. All right, folks. Good night.